Hi there, and in this episode, I'd like to just share with you some of my favorite books from over the years. And this is from all subjects, not just the usual subjects of Islam and Christianity. But just to start off, the two favorite top books of all time for me must, of course, and totally predictably be the Quran, particularly the Yusuf Ali translation, which I've always loved. It was the first Quran I was ever given by anyone. And on every page at the bottom there, you can see commentary by Yusuf Ali. And it's very beautiful. The emphasis on the spiritual insight, spiritual application. And he often quotes from Western scholars and poets, even like Shakespeare, Longfellow, and other classical writers. It's just a really nice translation, but it's not very popular today. Perhaps the English is quite old-fashioned. I have no problem with that, but it's not exactly 21st century English. But for me, if I was on desert island and I had one book, that would be that would be one of the several books. So hopefully, I would be able to take. The other book, of course, is the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, including within it the Apocrypha, or the Apocryphes, as someone once called them. So a Catholic canon would be required for that. So don't need to show you a picture of that. Keeping on the Muslim theme, another one of my all-time favorite books is this biography of Muhammad, his life based on the earlier sources by Martin Lings, who was an English writer. Now, this is a classic work. It's got to be the most beautifully written biography of Muhammad in the English language. It's the English itself is a masterpiece of literature, as well as a great biography of the Prophet. And I can't praise this biography highly enough. And it is indeed very highly esteemed, and the author won many prizes for this, and it's been published in French, Italian, Spanish, Turkish, Dutch, Malay, etc., etc. He won a prize from Al-Azhar University in Cairo, and received a decoration, it says, from President Mubarak. I'm not sure that's a good thing or not, but he did nonetheless. A book that will always be close to my heart is this one by Guy Eaton, who I mentioned before. Guy Eaton was a British diplomat. He was a Muslim for 50 years when he passed away just several years ago. He's buried in London. And this is the book that by the end of which I basically had become a Muslim, although I hadn't said any creed. But again, this is also a literary masterpiece, and it's very erudite. The English is beautiful, and it's a million miles from the kind of harsh sectarianism one gets so often these days from many Muslims. It's a beautiful piece of literature, and I highly recommend that as well. Excuse me. Now, in a very different way, I recommend this. I've mentioned this before in a previous video, The Quran and the Secular Mind, A Philosophy of Islam by Shabir Akhtar. This is a book of its own, in its own kind. It's sui generis in a way. I found it intellectually intoxicating when I read this, and I've read it several times. It's very difficult to summarize what it's about, but he certainly delves deep into philosophy in general, Western philosophy, as well as Islamic philosophy, and in the way the Quran expresses truth about the world, and also how it interacts with secularism, the secular mind, particularly Western ideologies, full of profound insights. Again, another book I can't recommend highly enough. And this book actually features on Tim Winter's recommended reading list as well. Another book which I just love is by a relatively recent author, Jonathan A.C. Brown, who's a professor of Islamic studies at Georgetown University in the States. He's a relatively young Islamic scholar. He's a Muslim convert as well as a scholar of Islam. And this book, The Challenges and Choices of Interpreting the Prophet's Legacy. Misquoting Muhammad, actually, apparently the publisher decided to give it this title to, in a way, parallel Bart Ehrman's book, Misquoting Jesus. So this is supposed to be a similar kind of market for readers. It's basically a history of early Islam, the history of the Prophet's life, history of the Quran and the early community, the Sahaba, and he's particularly good on the development of the Sharia and the four madhabs and the early conflicts within Islam. It's just an amazing, great introduction to Islam and the life of Muhammad. Rave reviews from scholars, not surprisingly. What else? So changing tack completely. Other favorite books of mine, nothing to do with the aforementioned. I got to kind of mention this. Immanuel Kant, The Critique of Pure Reason. This is not the edition I normally use, but it's available in this handy Penguin Classics. Who was Immanuel Kant? Well, he was a German philosopher, and this book was published in 1781, just before the French Revolution, and it is the central text of modern philosophy. It's to do with epistemology, primarily metaphysics, and ontology to some extent. This is the most difficult book I've ever read, and it's famously difficult. And it's not an introductory text. One has to know a little bit about the precursor philosophies in the West, for example, the rationalism that came from Descartes, or the empiricism that came from David Hume, the Scottish philosopher. One has to be aware of the context in which this book was written. But it's I like it because it was like attempting to scale the Mount Everest of intellectual work. It was an extraordinary journey and very challenging. I mean, he virtually invented he did invent a lot of terms which are unique to his philosophy. Someone has to learn a new language virtually to even understand it. There's been hugely influential, a seminal work on all subsequent philosophy in the West. And thus, if you want to understand the Western mind, the mindset, the Weltanschauung, as it's called in German, then his thought is absolutely essential to grasp. That's a picture of him. I like the way the portrait centers on here, his brain, because that's the most important thing about him, rather than half his face is missing. So this is a great work, and I've often returned to it. Very impressive. Again, I wouldn't really recommend that for everyone at all, only for people who are interested in this particular subject. So that is one of my favorite books. In terms of literature, my favorite novel of all time has got to be this, George Eliot, Middlemarch. George Eliot actually was a woman, Mary Ann Evans, and when was she born? In 1819 in England. And she called herself George Eliot, I think, so that she could be easily published in quite a male-dominated world. And this book has often been called the greatest novel in English literature, and I can agree with that. And I just highly recommend. When I first read this, I found this intoxicating as well. Her use of language, her psychological insights into human nature, her sheer intellectual power is quite awesome. In fact, it's interesting. In her day, it wasn't known that she was a woman. She published this under the title George Eliot, but the one person who did guess, just from the writing alone, that the author was a woman was Charles Dickens. Everyone else kind of thought, yep, definitely a bloke, but he thought, no, I can tell by the way she's writing, this book is by a woman. Such was Dickens's power of insight into the author's gender just from the story. So I recommend that, as do lots of people. Great novel. One of my other great passions is poetry. John Donne, until about 5 years ago, was my favorite poet. He's a metaphysical poet from the Elizabethan and James and time, a contemporary of Shakespeare almost. But I think even eclipsing Donne is this chap, T.S. Eliot. And he was born in the States of English ancestry, and he came to England in his 20s and became a citizen here, and is probably the greatest poet of the 20th century. That's his collected poems. But my favorite poem of all his poems is this thing called the Four Quartets. Very slim volume. What's it about? Well, that's a good question. It's about time. I mean, really is about time. And I'll just read you a first this is not easy reading. I'm not going to read the whole poem or even much of it at all. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What may have been is an abstraction, remaining a perpetual possibility, only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been points to one end, which is always present. I could read this, or it is gorgeous. It's a very, very religious and spiritual work. It's profound meditation on meaning of existence, time, and the nature of life, etc. This is perhaps his, this and the book called The Wasteland are probably the two greatest works of the 20th century. And I always try and keep this by my side. A remarkable, remarkable book. In terms of Christianity, this book is actually my favorite, really. The Shape of Catholic Theology. I mean, how uninteresting can you get? The Shape of Catholic Theology by Aidan Nichols, OP. That means he was an order of preachers, a Dominican. He taught or teaches at Oxford University. And this is an introduction to Catholic theology designed for the theological students. This is an advanced text, but I just love it. It's really well written. It's beautifully focused intellectually. It talks about the existence and concept of God, the philosophical principle of order in theology, scripture, tradition, the councils, the magisterium, and so on. It's a real feast for those of us who get off on this, and I do. Fascinating stuff, and it's just one of my favorite books. It's full of good Catholic theology. Obviously I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but it's when I read books like this, then I know that Catholicism is at its best an intellectual tradition to be respected, even when one disagrees with it. And Aidan Nichols is one of the finest expositors of that great tradition. Another book is not one of my favorites, but I thought I'd throw it in anyway, because I'm sometimes asked to recommend a good introduction to the New Testament. And this I would recommend, The New Testament, a historical introduction to the early Christian writings by Bart Ehrman. This is the 5th edition. In fact, there's now up to the 7th edition. He keeps on revising it in the light of feedback from students and universities. It's published by Oxford University Press. So what's so special about this one, which I think is the best introduction ever written? Well, it used to be the case that introductions to the New Testament were really boring and dry, and you really needed motivation to get through them. This book is readable, interesting, dare I say enjoyable, not necessarily an adjective you'd hear very often used of texts on the New Testament, and is actually really popular apparently with students at universities. It's got lots of color pictures in it, which anyway it has, and it's just a runaway success. It's aimed at an undergraduate text, but an intelligent layman could read that quite easily, I would have thought. And it's a really good introduction to all the books of the New Testament, and the historical context, and some of the issues of theology and textual criticism and manuscripts. I mean, basically the whole shebang is there in one book. So I do recommend that as a really good introduction to it. I'll put a link to it down below as well. I mean, there are so many other books I've read thousands of them, and these are just not a random selection, because some of these are really important to me, but there are other books I've left out that I could have included, put it that way. And but I just want to give you a flavor of what I like. My interests are quite eclectic. I love philosophy as well as literature and poetry, as well as theology and biblical studies and philosophical theology, and I love studying Akida. I'm very keen on the works of Ibn Taymiyyah, and so on and so on. So, and I've even got a foothold now into cell biology through DNA, which is a fascinating subject. Anyway, I hope that hasn't bored you, Rigid. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to leave them below. And I'll see what I can do to leave links to most of these texts if you wanted to purchase them and read them for yourself. Bye for now.